just gonna leave the blanket statement here that we are recording, so don't share anything that you don't want recorded in posterity. But feel free to shout out any questions in the midst of it. I'm going to try to get through it fairly quickly so that we have time for questions and discussion at the end. But if something comes up in the middle of it, feel free to either drop it in the chat or just shout it out. I would say raise your hand, but right now, the way I'm sharing screens, I can't quite see everybody, so I might not see a raised hand. But we'll definitely see the raised hand at the end. So everybody, welcome. This is the overview of the Manufacturing Bootcamp. It's a program that we are partnered with NextCore on, and I'm very excited about because this is content that I'm very passionate about, and it's going to be free and open to the public, so everybody can join in, follow along, and we also have some grant funding associated with that, but I'll get into all of that detail later. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Berlinich. I am the Manufacturing Program Manager for InnovationWorks. So sort of my goal is to help startups work with manufacturers, particularly in Southwestern Pennsylvania, and to help manufacturers in Southwestern Pennsylvania be better manufacturers, better businesses, and more likely to work with startups. The team here that we have at InnovationWorks on the hardware sector also consists of Jesse Mazzoni, who manages Alpha Lab Gear, our accelerator program for businesses with physical products. And Mike Formica is our Managing Director of Hardware, who oversees the whole hardware sector. So, as I had mentioned before, we are partnered with NextCore, which is a sister organization based out of Rochester, New York, and the Finger Lakes region. They are both a manufacturing extension partner that supports manufacturing companies and a entrepreneurial economic development organization that helps companies. So they were the primary developer of this curriculum, and I've been lucky enough to help support them in developing it. So they ran a cohort of companies through this programming back in January. We've made some tweaks, and now we're running a second group through. So the program is sponsored by the NIST MEP network. So that is a federal funding agency that basically supports the MEP network, economic development organizations that are in each state all across the United States, as well as Puerto Rico, aimed at specifically helping small to mid-sized manufacturers with the goal of ultimately stimulating and improving the economy. So this is where the funding for the 3 grants that we have available is coming from. So thank you very much to NIST. The program is also sponsored by NISTAR, which is the Science and Technology and Innovation branch of the state of New York. So very similar to the Ben Franklin, how they sponsor InnovationWorks, as well as our 3 sister organizations. NISTAR sponsors NextCore and is also a sponsor of this program. I had mentioned that we worked with NextCore to help develop and refine this curriculum, but we also couldn't have done it without the help from these other wonderful partners, including the Rochester Institute of Technology, Fuse Hub, which is a New York statewide MEP, and then our local MEP, for those of you who aren't familiar with, is Catalyst Connection. So, and then again, I represent InnovationWorks, managing our manufacturing programs, and I work with our Alpha Lab Gear companies as well. So when it comes down to it, what is the objectives of this program? I would say at a high level, the objective of this program is to use the Manufacturing Readiness Level Framework, or MRL, as a sort of checklist to try to help hardware startups be more successful. And how do we measure success? Well, quicker time to market, less wasted expense and wasted effort, and more successful partnerships, ideally with US-based manufacturers. So that is the ultimate goal. Everybody involved in this is an economic development organization, so ultimately what we're really trying to do is to grow revenue and create jobs. So that's the goal. For those of you who aren't familiar with the MRL, it's a 1 to 10 scale of basically how ready your product is for manufacturing, and it's oftentimes represented, I've seen in a lot of pitch decks, as just a single number, which it typically is represented as a single number, but it really is composed of the 9 different sort of areas that are essential to successfully manufacturing a product, as well as 22 total sub-threads under those 9 different sort of categories. And each one of them has a sub-thread MRL. Your overall MRL is ultimately represented by the lowest number. And so the recipients of the grant funding that we're providing will get the opportunity to work with Rochester Institute of Technology to do a full MRL assessment, which takes about a 2-hour conversation. And then the professionals there who have done dozens of these reviews will sort of provide you with this chart and some feedback as to what they perceive as your biggest risk areas that should be developed in order to continue to move towards scale. For those of you who have already applied for the grant funding, you may have recognized this chart. So NextCore was able to distill the 22 subthreads of the MRL down into a quick 15-minute initial assessment to sort of give you an idea of where your product might be on the MRL and the TRL spectrum as it is right now. The thing that I find really useful about this chart is that it also has a lot of other terminology and how it roughly correlates to the different MRL levels. So most people would be familiar with MVP or pre-alpha prototypes, alpha prototypes, beta, pilot runs. You may be familiar with EVT, engineering validation testing prototypes, DVT, PVT, stuff like that. So this chart is very useful. I would highly encourage you to fill it out. You can fill it out at learn2manufacture.org if you're just curious to see where you fall on this, or it's also linked in the application for the grant funding, which I'll get to in a minute here. So how we intend to implement this programming overall, I put together this little Gantt chart. So as I'd mentioned before, it is open. It is an open boot camp. Anybody can attend these webinars. We are starting right here in this last week of September. I'd recommend to anybody that wants to participate, fill out the initial stage assessment, figure out where you are. And then in 2 weeks, we'll begin kicking off our sessions. So the webinars, which cover the 8 different topic areas, covering everything that you need to know about manufacturing at a whole variety of scales. Each presentation will be about an hour, and they will run through December with a couple of weeks off here and there. Let me see. I will go over the content of those in detail just after this, what sort of topics we're covering in each one of those sessions. You can feel free to drop in on any of them that you want as needed, but if you're awarded the grant funding, you'll need to definitely participate in all of them. So I'll also be hosting open office hours pretty much now through next summer. For anybody who wants to follow along, you are more than welcome to put some time on my calendar in little 20-minute chunks, and we can cover any specific questions or topics. Each one of these sessions also comes with a companion template for some of the documentation. Thanks, Mike Marvin, who is running the program out of Rochester. Just put the link in the chat for the initial assessment. And the office hours. So that way, you know, if you have a question on a specific topic area and you want to run it by me, you can throw some time on my calendar. You're always more than welcome to do that. We'll also be hosting some tours of manufacturing facilities. So I'd love to hear your feedback as to what type of facilities you'd like to see and learn more about and potentially partner with. So that is for the open boot camp. Free, open, anybody can come to those webinars, and I'll be following up with everybody who's RSVP'd to this, creating a distribution list to update everybody about when those webinars specifically are scheduled. I'll also be recording all the webinars and sharing them out afterwards to if you end up not being able to make it. So the If you are one of the 3 companies that is selected to receive the grant funding, in addition to all of the things in the open boot camp, we'll also be doing some group discussions with the other members, the other grant recipients, and other members of the Alpha Lab Gear community. So you can benefit from some outside perspective and review of different documentations or requirements, communication plans that you have, negotiations to work with your manufacturers. I'll also be doing more intensive individualized coaching sessions with any company, doing a deeper dive of document review with the types of things that you would need to use to work with any manufacturer. We'll also be helping you to compile a list of suppliers that you want to reach out to in order to get quotes, review quotes, all of that sort of stuff. We can tackle that a little bit in the limited open office hours available for any companies, but it's really sort of the burden is then going to be on you to do that work and make efficient use of the limited time. Whereas the benefit of being one of the recipients is you'll have additional time to get deeper into it. You'll also get the opportunity to have the full MRL assessment from RIT, with one starting here at the beginning of the project period and one at the end. So the grant funding that I keep talking about is all to subsidize a project which is aimed at advancing your manufacturing readiness level. And that project should begin in the October timeframe, and it will run through next summer. And so the idea is that you would do your full MRL assessment before the project begins and then after the project, so we can get an idea of how effective these funds were and those projects were at making you more prepared to increase the scale of your manufacturing efforts. So I will talk more about the grant funding in particular towards the end, but first I wanted to cover sort of the topic areas and what are all of the different nuts and bolts of the curriculum that we'll cover. It is based on a number of different sources, including the Department of Defense's MRL rating system and their guidebook, as well as the DOE's Build for Scale curriculum. And then there have been a ton of additional supplemental information provided by NextCore, RIT, and InnovationWorks to supplement this curriculum. And it is based largely on this textbook, Product Realization Going from 1 to a Million by Anna Thornton, which is an excellent textbook. All of the grant recipients will also receive a copy of the textbook, but I highly recommend picking one up either way. So session 1 is all about the product development process. So a couple of different frameworks, the TRL, the technology readiness level, the manufacturing readiness level, and then the commercial readiness level, and how these frameworks can be used to sort of guide your efforts and where you are working on improving your design or your manufacturing process in order to prepare for the next stage of scale. We'll also talk about different prototyping terminology and prototyping testing plans, or prototyping plans for nailing down your specifications. The meat of this presentation, though, is about specifications and requirements. So what are the difference between requirements and specifications, and how should they be documented on your MRD and your PRD? So your MRD is a market requirements document. How do you know that your design solves a pain point that your customer has, your market has? The product requirements document is, how do you know that your physical product actually will solve the problem that you set out to solve? The foundation of any physical product, good specifications are essential, and so that's why this part goes first. And with each week's sessions, we have homework. It is based largely, we're not going to be collecting this or grading it. It is largely an honor system, but these are the sort of templates that we had mentioned. Each week we'll provide additional reading sources from both the textbook and other online resources to help flesh out the discussion that we had in this session. But we'll also provide a template of a PRD if you don't already have one, which you can use to fill out. So Section 2, we talk about the bill of process, or bill of materials and bill of process. Many of you are probably familiar with what a bill of materials is. It's basically the list of all of the parts that make up your physical product. A bill of process, though, is oftentimes something that more people or fewer people are familiar with. And this is basically the steps of assembling your product. How it's basically the instruction set that tells you how do all of the pieces on your bill of materials fit together into a product. So we'll talk about what should be on your bill of materials and your bill of process, how should you manage different versions of these things, how were they best used as communication tools when working with suppliers, and what types of software can help you manage all of this information, especially in this increasingly complex supply chain world that we live in, how essential these sorts of documents are. The homework from this section is obviously to use our templates to begin filling out your own bill of materials and your own bill of process. And for the companies who are further along, we will also be able to provide you with some additional perspective. I've never seen a bill of materials that had everything that is listed in these presentations. There's always something missing that could also be beneficial to include and track on your bill of materials. In session 3, we'll talk about cost and risk management. So how do you model costs when it comes to physical products, and how do you estimate costs whenever you don't have a solid idea of what your costs are or should be, and how does that impact your cash flow models? The number one most important thing that, number one most limiting thing that kills hardware startups is cash. They're far more cash flow intensive than software startups, and so having a good practice of understanding what your costs are and modeling them is essential. And that sort of leads into risk management, i.e. one of the biggest risks for hardware startups is cost management, but we'll talk about a whole host of other different types of risks and what you should be doing in order to track them and reassess them at regular intervals to make sure that nothing creeps up on you or you're not exposing yourself to too much liability. Homework in this section is to continue to flesh out your bill of materials and your bill of process so that it is costed. It's easy to put together a bill of materials listing every part that's in your process, or a bill of material or bill of process that lists every step, but do you know exactly how long it takes for each sub-step in the process, and do you know exactly how much that part costs at different order quantities, things like that. It's a deep rabbit hole to go down. Session 4, we will do an introduction to quality. So we'll talk about a quality plan for your overall project or overall product and management of that, depending on different suppliers that you might use. We'll also talk about prototyping quality test plan. So how do you use prototypes to set different quality standards and metrics, and how do you document that into a test plan? Also understanding what types of variations are inherent to different manufacturing processes and how those impact your quality standards. We'll also do during this session an overview of the MRL assessment and the full MRL assessment. What do those 9 different topic areas mean, and how can you sort of interpret the 22 different subthreads that are under them? Homework for this section is to draft a quality test plan for your prototypes, as well as scheduling planned reviews for the future as your product matures and scales, so that you don't lose sight of any of the things that you identify in these early stages as being potential quality issues. Section 5, we will talk about manufacturing processes and DFM, DFX. So given your design, we cover a whole wide range of different types of manufacturing processes in brief terms. So everything from, casting to injection molding to machining or PCB fab. We'll talk a little bit about the things that you need for working with all sorts of different suppliers, and how design for manufacture, DFM, design for assembly, DFA, and DFX, design for insert variable here are affected by the processes that you select, as well as the documentation which you should have put together up to this point. So some common DFX things that you might not have considered but might be essential for your market or your customer or other stakeholders are designed for reliability, designed for serviceability, designed for sustainability, designed for environmental impact. There's a whole host of other different design frameworks that you might want to consider depending on what your product serves. So the homework for this section is to identify a DFX principle that could apply to your product and put that on your 12-month roadmap to figure out how and when you're going to begin tackling that if you're not already doing so. Section 6, we'll talk about different suppliers. So how do you identify what type of a supplier they are? Are they a contract manufacturer? Are they an OEM manufacturer? Are they a service provider? Or are they a sales rep? And then how do you manage those relationships depending on the supplier that you are working with? We'll talk about how do you find suppliers, what are some tools that you can use to find them, what documentation should you get in place when you start working with a supplier, what should you think about whenever you go on a tour of the factory, when you're vetting a different supplier and selecting one ultimately. And then we will also cover supplier management. So something that I find that a lot of startups fall prey to is they believe that once they pay somebody to do it, their responsibility for management of that service or project ends there. So we'll talk a bit about project management as well as negotiations and intellectual property. So strategies for either getting documentation contracts in place with suppliers to protect your intellectual property, as well as other alternative means of protecting your intellectual property based on how you manage your supply chain. So homework from this session will be to list your current suppliers as well as identifying potential new suppliers. And then the second to last session, we will talk about a deeper dive on production quality and testing. Everything from measuring and tracking to calibration of equipment, and how should you be checking up on or vetting this depending on the supplier that you use. How do you put together a test plan and a control plan to assess whether your quality specifications are being met? And then what do you do to manage those QA checkpoints? We'll also talk about certifications and regulations, as well as the labeling requirements for those different regulations and certifications across different industries, and how you can find out which a variety of different strategies for finding out which regulations or certifications you would either benefit from or be required to prove that you're meeting. And then we'll wrap up by talking about quality management systems, as well as the QMS document pyramid and the failure modes and effects analysis. These things are oftentimes topics that are kicked down the road by many early stage startups. And so we have the ability with this curriculum to both cover those topics in detail for the companies that are facing it right now, but also scheduling time in the future to revisit these topics to help ensure that you are not forgetting to address these topics. And that goes hand in hand with the homework of creating a placeholder at the very least for your control plan and your FMEA, adding it to your tech package and scheduling times to follow up on developing those documents. And then the final session, I would encapsulate this by considerations for scale. So all of the other different things as you scale up your product and your production and your distribution, how do you plan for distribution? How do you forecast for it and manage those different logistics? Once you begin getting a lot of product out into the world, it becomes even more critical about how do you label your product, both internally and externally. Everything from serial numbers to traceability for recalls. What are you obligated to label your product with if you are subject to certain certifications or regulations? Different discussions like that. And then we will wrap up with a roadmap template specifically for projects that were related to this MRL funding, but also how to select different projects and prioritize your internal product development time in order to continue to innovate and grow as a company. So ultimately, if you show up and you participate in all of these sessions and you do all the homework assignments, what you will be able to walk away from, our goal is that you'll walk away with a complete tech package, your material requirements or market requirements document, your product requirements documents, bill of materials, bill of process, everything that you would need to hand off to a potential supplier, as well as a list of potential suppliers, in order to receive quotes on taking your product from a prototype to production or an idea to reality. Will also help to assemble. You should also have at least a 12-month roadmap for all of the other different risk assessments, cost modeling, failure modes analysis, quality plan, certification plan, and the additional considerations for scale, and when you will be tackling those additional topics as your company develops. So the details of the funding for those projects, it is sponsored by NIST and administered through NextCore. We have three $20,000 grants for teams based in southwestern Pennsylvania. It should be good for, on average, 2 projects. So you don't have to do one $25,000 project. You can do a variety of smaller projects. It really comes down to what is best. How is your product's MRL assessment? How lumpy is it? You might be very far advanced in some regards, but then very far behind in others. So you could tackle a lot of small projects and increase your overall MRL more quickly with smaller projects rather than one large project. It's very flexible in that regard. NextCore will provide $4 for every $1 that the team puts in, up to a cap of $20,000. So how that works in practice is that we will work with you to define a project, which is important given the stage of your current product and business. Once that project is defined and your suppliers are identified, you will get a Catalyst Connection will work with you to put a scope of work and a contract in place between you, Catalyst, and the suppliers for that given project. Catalyst will invoice the supplier. Catalyst will send a PO to the supplier. The supplier will invoice Catalyst, and then Catalyst will split that invoice between your responsibility as a startup and NextCore's responsibility up until that cap is reached. So, for instance, if you have a $10,000 project with manufacturer A, Catalyst will send manufacturer A a purchase order for $10,000 as spec'd out in the contract. The manufacturer will do the work. They then send an invoice when the work is done to Catalyst. Catalyst will pay them $10,000, so the manufacturer is happy. They get paid in a timely fashion. They can provide net 30 terms usually because they have a supplier that they trust, and it's not tied to your credit or reputation for a non-existent company. And then Catalyst will then in turn invoice you for the 20% of that. So Catalyst would then invoice you for $2,000 and invoice NextCore for $8,000. And you would still have then $12,000 left on your cap to tackle another project. And if it was a $50,000 project or a $100,000 project, then whenever the Catalyst got the $100,000 invoice, they would invoice you for $80,000 and invoice NextCore for $20,000 because you would have exceeded the cap on the grant. And I think that just about covers how that works. I just wanted to also put a little disclaimer in there that both IW through the Scalable Innovation Program, which is the program that I manage, has additional funds that are available, and so does Catalyst Connections. So just if you don't receive one of these 3 grants for this particular program, it doesn't mean that there's no funding available. So I'd still recommend that you fill out the application, put some time in my calendar and office hours to talk about it. I'm always happy to try to find ways to help any company in this ecosystem. So the actual logistics of how this application process works, we already have a number of applications right now. I'm asking that everybody get their applications in by this Friday, and the application link is right here, bit.ly IW NextCore is the URL. It's a simple 15-minute application, and then another 15-minute initial stage assessment, which you can see here. That's all the information that we'll need. We'll be reviewing applications next week and selecting winners by the end of next week. Awardees, in exchange for being awarded this grant funding, you will expect that you participate in all 8 of the webinars, watch all 8 of them, participate regularly in our one-on-one meetings. You'll be asked to complete annual impact surveys, I believe from both us and Catalyst Connection and NextCore for several years following the receipt of the grant funds. They're typically like fairly simple 20-minute surveys once a year, not too big of a deal. We'll expect that you are ready and willing to invest up to $5,000 in these manufacturing projects over the next 6 to 9 months in order for you to actually utilize the full grant, the full $20,000 award. You'll need to ultimately spend $5,000. And then all projects will have to be completed by July of 2023. Any funds that are unspent at that time will be forfeit. So we're hoping that you'll be able to get moving on this right now. And that will be a evaluation metric for who we ultimately select. You'll also be required to complete the full MRL assessment with RIT. Again, that was 2 2-hour conversations, one at the start of the project period and one at the end. So they could be 6 to 9 months apart. And then you will also need for your business to be located in our MEP district, the Southwestern Pennsylvania. For those of you who are familiar with IW's districts, the same, all of the same 9 counties plus Indiana, Somerset, and Cambria, basically 3 more counties on the eastern side. So I'll also put this disclaimer in here that we are looking for a variety of companies across a variety of stages and a variety of industries and technologies and manufacturing readiness levels so that we can test and get some data on the efficacy of these grants and this curriculum for different types of companies. So if you're not very far along, don't be discouraged. That doesn't disqualify you. Also, if you're very far along, I would say don't be discouraged. We are looking for people who are going from, low rate production to high rate production as well. If you're trying to get from MRL 9 to 10 or 8 to 9 or 8 to 10, that would also be a very good project to tackle. And I would say the one-on-one meetings will be very valuable in those cases, because I wouldn't be too worried that the webinars are too high level, because we have lots of additional supplementary information for companies participating in the grant program. So back on here to reiterate that, your company could be at this concept stage and trying to get to an engineering prototype, or you could be at an engineering prototype at this MRL4 and trying to get to design a DVT prototype at MRL6, or you could be going from, a DVT to production, or from an MRL 8 where you are just sampling on a pilot line and moving into low rate production. All things are eligible, and here is an example of a roadmap that you could put, that we would help you put together to sort of define the projects that we're looking for. This is also a really great example of some projects that you might be willing to tackle as eligible for this grant. So project 1 here is to develop an engineering prototype. Some of the subtasks in here are to develop your PRD, your bill of materials, and then assemble looks like and works like prototype using the services of an engineering service or design company or a contract manufacturer, depending on sort of your product and manufacturing process that you've selected. It will impact different MRL subthreads and ultimately help you get from an engineering prototype, a pre-engineering prototype, to an engineering prototype, aka a looks like, works like prototype combined. These projects can be operated in parallel or in series, depending on where you are. In this case, I think this would assume that this is then going to be in series. Yeah, you would need that engineering prototype in order to move on to this next level of developing your GD&T drawings, defining your acceptance and test criteria, as well as your quality plan. And this would sort of keep you in this engineering validation test prototype range, but it would impact different sub-thread MRLs because it's largely generating not a new physical prototype, but the specifications necessary for you to move on to the next level of prototype. So projects like that are also more than acceptable. Let's see. I think that, yeah, that about covers everything that I wanted to cover in this overview webinar. I'd like to open it up for questions now. See if there's anything that I missed.
Matt, this is Kit Needham. I just wanted to ask you, for the free portion, not the scholarships, but anybody can participate? You have no quota, or?
Nope, anybody can participate.
Okay, all right. And the other thing is, and I think I know the answer, but if you don't have a proof of concept yet, you might have a drawing or an idea. You're actually better off if you're a little further along and have a little bit more content as opposed to what you're trying to do, or does it matter?
I think in terms of the grant side of things, it would be better if they had some documentation in order to actually know what they're trying to solve. I would say that in order for the minimum level for somebody to receive one of the grants is to have a pretty well-defined problem that they're trying to solve, and some validation, whether it's simulations or testing, to prove that their idea will actually solve that problem.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily want to just encourage somebody to spend money to find out that they can't solve the problem that they're intending to solve.
Okay.
Are there any restrictions on use of funds for the grant program? For example, could they be used towards materials purchase or other sorts of things like that?
I believe that the funds are typically not useful for purchasing just straight materials or capital equipment. However, if those things are necessary to take you to the next step of the project, to advance your manufacturing readiness level. For instance, for your product, now if you are trying to scale up your production and that involves purchasing a new piece of equipment, but also hiring additional people and training them to run that piece of equipment, that would be more of the project would need to be scoped for that whole aspect of it. But
okay,
that, yeah.
I think I understand.
Although, just to kind of clarify, we do have participants quite often. I mean, a lot of the roadmap stuff is moving your prototypes along, and so sometimes you can get funding for the materials needed to build the prototype, and that can even include your first commercialization prototype. So I'm going to make 20 of these and get them out to my prospective customers. So it really is tied around the project moving you to the next MRL level. And so there's really not any hard and fast restrictions in terms of where it can be spent. But as Matt said, there are some, it's along the lines of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the assist, Mike. Mike, excuse me. Mike Marvin is our partner from Rochester, so the authority on this matter. Rohan, you raised your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So this grant, the scalable innovation, and the accelerator, Alpha Lab Gear, these are all can be applied for, and acceptance into one of them does not exclude you from the other one. Am I correct?
Exactly. Yes. So you can participate in Alpha Lab Gear and not any of these other things. You can participate just in this boot camp and not be a member of Alpha Lab Gear. You can receive a scalable grant and not participate in either. The only thing that I would say is you probably won't receive one of these next core grants and a scalable grant. That would be more of an either or situation, but you could be participating in Alpha Lab Gear and the boot camp and receive the next core grant, or you can receive a scalable grant.
Got it. And just to pile on that, we're not missing any other on that list, right? That we're not aware of. Is there a fourth or a fifth?
The other potential sources of funding, I would say, are MEP funding. So Mike Marvin can speak to that as a potential. Also, I don't think we have anybody from Catalyst Connection on here, but they have a maker to manufacturer grant program. I don't know if that's fully subscribed right now. I know that they're getting some additional funding through the Build Back Better program. I'm not sure if any of that would apply, but I'd be happy to connect you with some folks at Catalyst or make the introduction to Mike Marvin to talk about alternative sources if that's what's best for you guys.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would also recommend Connie as a resource for that, because the MEPs kind of vary from location to location in terms of what funding they have available. So directly going to Connie wouldn't hurt either.
Exactly.
I have a question. Does this grant sponsor like a chemical production or like chemical manufacture?
It could. I think that the MRL was really designed originally for mechanical, electromechanical products and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the fundamentals of it apply to scaling up any type of product. So there's a lot of different modules that are very useful for that, especially when it comes to sort of supply chain management, supplier negotiations, quality programming, planning, assurance, all of that type of stuff. So I think that what I would encourage you in your sort of application is to emphasize the understanding of what is your current business need, and how would advancing your MRL level, why is that the most critical path forward for your business right now?
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt, I have a question. Can we edit our application? I kind of threw mine together pretty fast last night.
Yeah, I just pulled up the chat and saw that question, Carl. I am not sure, actually. I'd have to check the settings on the Google form for that application. But if you just fill it out again, I will be able to merge them. So I wouldn't worry about that. And if you want to see what you wrote before, so you have a starting place, I can also just send that to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Get rid of that. Let's see. Yeah. I also don't want to put anybody on the spot. So if you are trying to formulate a question or you know that you're gonna, hang up this call and remember that you had a question, don't worry. I have open office hours available all this week for you to just feel free to throw some time on my calendar. We can jump on and dig into any specific sort of question, especially if you haven't had a chance yet to even open the application, so you don't know what you don't know yet. That I would recommend, pulling that up now, and so then find a time to make sure you get on my calendar. And you could also send me an email if none of those times work. I'm sure I probably have other availability. It's just that I'm scheduling meetings is the bane of my existence, so I try to automate that as much as possible.
So Matt, this is Kit again. Will you be sending to all of us who participated a copy of the recording?
Yes, I will, as well as some people who have reached out to me ahead of time and said that they couldn't make it, but they'd love to hear this. So
Okay.
feel free to sidebar me if you're ashamed of your video or you said something that you regret and you want me to edit out this Q&A portion before I pass that along. There's no shame.
No problem.
Hey, could I ask you a question about some of the other potential grants or some things that some other grants that you guys have given in the past if we don't end up making it through the cut for this one?
Yeah. Fire away. Or you could also do it in office hours.
Yeah. I mean, I was just curious what those looked like, how much they were for, what kind of things they funded. I could also sign up for office hours too, if that makes more sense.
Yeah, no worries. I have time available, so I can get into that a bit. So the scalable grant it works very similar to these NextCore manufacturing bootcamp grants. The difference is that instead of creating this three-part contract structure where you do not have to put the cash down up front in most situations, the scalable grants operate as reimbursement grants. So we still try to specify a scope of work. Who is the supplier that you're working with? What are they going to do for you that is advancing your business? What's going to be the sort of potential economic impact on your business and on their business? Why is this going to incentivize sort of a mutually beneficial relationship that has the potential to grow? Once that is put in place, then you would send us the proof of payment on expenses under that scope of work, and we would reimburse you for 50% of those project costs up into a given cap. Now, the cap on those grants are flexible. They can be anywhere from $1,000 to $20,000. And that all depends purely on the scope of work and how that is defined. How meaningful is it to you? How meaningful is it to the manufacturer's business? So it can be very flexible, but you just have to sort of have more of the cash on hand in order to do that.
So I have another question kind of related to that. So if we are, like, I'm planning on manufacturing my own stuff, would that be available to purchase machinery with? And also, is it possible that I could be paid to manufacture my own things for the larger grant, the one that we're talking about today?
That's a good question. I think it'd be more likely that we can get that to swing under the scalable grant than under the next core grant, because the next core grant is mostly about, it's aimed at trying to incentivize the connection of working with an outside supplier. So if you're looking to do stuff in-house, I think that the curriculum is great for that. Setting up the organization and the structures and the things, and making sure that you're thinking about all the things that you'd want to have in place. The scalable grants can be used for that, because we can sort of spec the project around what you're going to do, and you can provide your, so the reason why I always say 50% reimbursement on a project, that's just because state funds require you to have a match. So they want to ensure that you have skin in the game and that you're not frivolously spending the money, that it's actually going towards a real project. So on the scalable grants, you can count your hours as match, and then you can be reimbursed for the equipment. But that's just a little bit of gymnastics on the scope of work and how the project is scoped out.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Dylan, you have a question?
I do, yeah. And thanks for the presentation, Matt. Very much appreciate it. I was
problem.
wondering if you could speak a little bit more towards the network of local manufacturers that we can tap into as part of this program, in terms of like any specific materials, sectors, capabilities. I think that'd be helpful to walk through a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me actually, I'll pull up a screen here. It's something that I've been working on quietly for the last several years. So you do not have to work with any specific supplier. They just have to be based in southwestern Pennsylvania. And so on the Scalable Innovation website, scalableinnovation.org, under Hardware Entrepreneurs, Hardware Connections, I've been compiling this database, which is an Airtable database of all of the different suppliers that InnovationWorks has worked with, that our portfolio companies have worked with. And so it's a good starting place to figure out who can do what in the region. This is taking some time to load, but that's the full list, and there's like 550 companies on there. But you can also, these are sort of pre-filtered lists. So if you're looking for people who work with plastic, maybe you're not necessarily sure exactly what manufacturing method you want to utilize, but at least there's a subset here to start from. You can click there and it will pull up this sort of total list. But this is just one place to start. You could also use like ThomasNet or MFG to find suppliers. LinkedIn is also a good place if you're just networking with manufacturers, reaching out to other local manufacturers, and if they're not a good fit, asking them who is a good fit is oftentimes a really underestimated resource there. So here is a list of 48 different manufacturers that work with plastic, but that's everything from sort of wholesalers or distributors to injection molders and fabricators. If you click on this plastics capability one, you can add filters on here and say, okay, I just want to look at injection molders. And then there's a list of 21 different injection molders. It's not a comprehensive list by any means, and it's all I'm trying to always add to it and elaborate. So if you find something, feel free to shoot me a note and let me know that somebody else should be on there, somebody that you use or recommend. You could also filter this by location here. So I have all of the southwestern Pennsylvania counties listed, as well as an other PA, domestic and international filter on there. So all of the southwestern PA counties are ones that would be eligible for scalable grant funds. I should actually, now that I'm doing this, add the Catalyst Connection 3 additional counties on here, because for the next core grants, that expands the sort of scope of work a little bit. Although, actually, I believe it doesn't have to be, the manufacturer for those funds doesn't have to be southwestern Pennsylvania. You just have to be in southwestern Pennsylvania. So
That makes sense. And this seems like a really helpful resource. Thanks for sharing that.
yeah. All right. I did put in the chat, I put my email. It's actually mverlinich@innovationworks.org. I'm not trying to slip you guys a false email address. That's just an alias, so it's easier to spell. If you just email matt@innovationworks.org, it'll make its way to me. Then the link for office hours is bit.ly/IW manufacture. So I've got a little bit of time every day to chat about any questions related to this grant, or as the program begins and progresses, to talk about any sort of topics that come up along the way, or to review specific things. But, yeah.
Yeah, not so much a question, but a comment. The program curriculum looks terrific. Really looking forward to it. I almost feel like once it gets started, I'll be eager to like try to go faster than one of these per week. But I mean, if you can go faster, that would be great. But I guess the program schedule is set for this year at the very least. So, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you for that feedback, Rohan. That's very, very helpful. We have all of the presentations and all of the templates already. And I definitely would be willing to share them with you as is. But this is an iterative experiment that we're working on, like continuously improving the curriculum and adding to it. So
Right.
that's sort of the reason for this launch. And also, sending somebody a deck that is just bullet points without context can be helpful to some extent, but not always. So that's why the webinars, which I do intend to record and make available after the fact for people who are like, oh, I already have all of this stuff down, or maybe you watch the bill of materials presentation this year and it's, next year by the time you need to actually think about your quality program and you want to jump right ahead to the quality program. We'll have all of those polished up by then, but
Yeah, that would be great to have some of those templates available ahead of time for and I also acknowledge that all different companies might be at different rate of growth and different stages as well. So this pace makes sense. But yeah, I would love to get some of those templates which are extremely relevant to us right now. I'll message you about that offline.
thank you. All right. If we don't have any other questions, I think we can probably wrap this up. But again, feel free to either shoot me a message or put some time on my calendar for office hours. Be happy to work through things with you, answer any questions you have there. All right. We'll stop the recording. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Dylan. I appreciate it.